It was supposed to be a simple shortcut. I was already running late for an important meeting. The clock was ticking, and my usual route was congested with traffic. Frustrated, I decided to try something different. A path through the woods that I'd noticed many times before but had never considered. After all, how bad could it be? Everyone says it's just a few minutes faster, right? Think you know how this story ends? Share your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to subscribe for more chilling tales. I parked my car near the edge of the forest. The trees towered over me, their thick branches swaying gently in the wind. It looked peaceful, serene even. The kind of place where you'd expect birds to sing and maybe a deer or two to graze. But as I stepped out of my car, something in the air felt off. The moment my foot hit the ground, I had this strange feeling, like the woods were waiting. The air was still, no breeze, no rustling leaves. It felt unnatural, but with no time to waste, I pushed it aside. The path was narrow, barely wide enough for one person, but clear enough to follow. I started walking, the ground beneath me soft and damp from the morning dew. The deeper I went, the less light there seemed to be. The trees were blocking out the sun, and the shadows seemed to stretch longer than they should have. I noticed something odd, though. Every few steps, I could hear a soft crunch behind me, like someone or something was walking at the same pace. I turned around quickly, heart racing, but there was nothing there. The path was empty. I brushed it off as nerves, the sound of twigs snapping from the wind, maybe even an animal. But the sound came again, and again, closer this time. I paused, feeling a chill run down my spine. I wasn't alone. There was no way anyone could be following me. I was alone, right? I picked up the pace, trying to ignore the feeling that someone or something was just behind me, following every step. The trees around me felt like they were closing in. The path, once so clear, was becoming more twisted, more claustrophobic. The further I walked, the darker it seemed, and the farther I felt from the world I knew. Then, just as I thought I couldn't take it anymore, I saw it. A break in the trees ahead, an opening. Clearing. I nearly ran toward it, eager to escape whatever was creeping behind me. But as I stepped into the clearing, everything stopped. The air was colder now, and the wind had picked up again, but it wasn't the same breeze from before. This one felt colder, sharper. I shivered, looking around. The trees were moving now, almost as if they were shifting in slow motion. I heard it then, the unmistakable sound of footsteps crunching the dry leaves. Louder now. Closer. The hairs on my neck stood up. I turned around quickly, expecting to see someone, but there was no one there, not a single person in sight. That's when I heard the whisper. It wasn't loud, but it was there. Faint, like it was coming from behind the trees, just out of sight. "Don't leave." I froze. My heart hammered in my chest. No one was there, just the trees, the leaves. But that voice felt like it was inside my head. I stumbled back a step, my legs shaky, and that's when I saw it. Movement just on the edge of my vision. A figure barely visible in the shadows. It was tall, its shape indistinct, but there, standing still, watching. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't move. My legs wouldn't cooperate. Then, in an instant, it moved. Swiftly. Far too quickly for something that had been standing still only a moment ago. It was right there, in the clearing just a few feet away. I turned and ran. My legs pumped, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see it. I just needed to get out of there. The path I had taken now seemed longer, twisted, almost like the woods were trying to keep me in. Every step felt heavier than the last. My breath was ragged as I ran, the footsteps, still behind me, getting louder. Then, as I approached the edge of the woods, where I thought the path would end, I realized something. The woods weren't ending. They were just beginning. The trees had moved. The road I had taken to enter the forest was now blocked, hidden behind thick walls of dark branches. There was no way out. I was trapped. And that's when I saw it again, the figure. It was standing just beyond the trees, motionless, waiting. The voice came again, but this time it was clearer, colder. "Stay with us. Forever." My body went numb. I couldn't think. I couldn't move. All I could do was stare as the figure stepped closer, the shadows swallowing it whole. Couldn't breathe. The figure just stood there, motionless, like it was waiting for me to make the first move. I tried to back away, but the trees behind me seemed to close in. I wasn't just trapped. The whole forest felt wrong, like it was alive and it wanted to keep me here. I thought about calling for help, but my phone, of course, was dead. I hadn't checked it in hours, but I knew I didn't have service out here. No way to reach anyone. For a moment, I just stood there, frozen. All I could hear was my heartbeat pounding in my ears and the soft rustling of the leaves in the wind. And then, the whispering started again. This time it was louder, clearer. "Stay with us." The voice wasn't just a voice, it was a presence. Like it wasn't coming from any one place, but from everywhere around me. The trees, the wind, the very ground beneath me, all seemed to be speaking. My body was shaking, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from where the figure had been standing. But now it was gone. I felt my pulse quicken as my eyes darted around, searching for movement. The woods were quiet now, too quiet. I glanced back toward the path I had just come from, only to find that the forest stretched on endlessly. There was no way back. I needed to find a way out. But where? I turned to face the thick trees ahead. My only option. The figure had disappeared, but the presence it left behind was worse. The woods weren't just a forest anymore. They were something else, something dark and alive. And it felt like they were watching me. I started walking, each step heavier than the last. Felt like I was moving through molasses. My mind kept telling me to turn back, but I knew there was no point. Couldn't go back now. The forest wouldn't let me. The deeper I went, the more I started noticing things. Strange shapes hidden in the shadows, eyes peering at me from the darkness. At first, I thought it was my imagination playing tricks on me, but the shapes moved, shifted like they were breathing. I could feel them, these unseen watchers, drawing closer. The path was still narrow, but it seemed to get darker and narrower the further I went. The air was thick now, suffocating. Every time I took a breath, it felt like the woods themselves were inhaling, drawing the air out of my lungs. The whispering came again, louder this time. I could make out words in the murmur. "Turn back. It's too late." I stopped dead in my tracks, my feet rooted to the ground. My mind screamed at me to listen, to run, to do anything but stand there, but my body wouldn't move. It was like something had taken control of me. And then I saw it, a figure far in the distance. But this time it wasn't just standing there. It was moving slowly, deliberately. It was tall, shadowy, its outline unclear, like a person made of smoke. I should have run. I should have turned and bolted out of there, but my legs felt paralyzed. All I could do was watch as the figure came closer, its form becoming clearer with every step. I saw the eyes. They were black, empty, hollow, and they locked onto me. No emotion, no humanity, just emptiness. I took a step back, but the ground was uneven, the roots of the trees catching my foot. I fell to the ground with a thud, and for a moment, I just lay there, staring up at the dark sky, trying to gather my thoughts. I had to get up. I had to run. But the figure was almost on top of me now. I scrambled to my feet, my heart racing, my mind a mess. I couldn't think straight. The figure was getting closer, but something in my gut told me that running would only make it worse. I had no choice. I had to face it. I braced myself. The figure was nearly there, and I could feel its presence now, like it was consuming everything around me. The air grew colder with each step it took. And then, as it reached me, it stopped. The forest went silent. Not a single sound. It was standing in front of me now, towering over me, its eyes never leaving mine. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I was trapped in that moment, in the face of something so unnatural, so terrifying, that my mind refused to comprehend it. Then, the figure bent down, slowly, its face coming closer to mine. The air grew colder, if that was even possible. It was like it was breathing down my neck, and in that moment, I felt an overwhelming wave of dread, a sense of finality. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure was gone. I stood there, shivering, frozen in disbelief. The whispering had stopped, but the tension in the air remained. I didn't know what had just happened, but I knew one thing. I wasn't alone in these woods. Not anymore. I looked around. The forest had changed, shifted. The trees seemed to lean in closer now, their branches like fingers trying to trap me. The path I'd been following had disappeared. The woods had swallowed it whole. I was lost, and the worst part, I had no idea how to get out. I was no longer just walking through the woods. I was stumbling, tripping, and desperately trying to hold on to my sanity. The trees loomed over me like dark sentinels, their twisted branches stretching towards the sky, as if reaching for something or someone. The air felt suffocating, thick with the weight of something I couldn't quite grasp. I had no idea where I was anymore, or how far I had gone, but I knew one thing for sure. I was lost. The forest wasn't just a place anymore. It was an entity alive and aware, and it was getting closer. Every snap of a branch, every gust of wind, felt like it was guiding me in a certain direction. Or maybe it was trapping me. I kept walking, my feet dragging across the uneven ground. Every few steps, I would hear something, a whisper, a rustle, a creak of the trees around me. But when I turned, there was nothing. Only the dark shadows, the endless trees, and that oppressive feeling that something was watching, waiting for me to make a mistake. I tried not to panic. I couldn't let the fear take over, not now. But it was getting harder. The farther I went, the more disoriented I became. It wasn't just that I couldn't find my way out. It was that I didn't even recognize the woods anymore. The path was gone, the trees seemed different, and the sounds around me were wrong. And then I heard it, a sound that made my blood run cold. Footsteps. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me, the result of the fear slowly eating away at my logic. But no, these were real. Someone, or something, was walking behind me, mirroring my every step. I spun around, heart pounding in my chest, but again, there was nothing. Just the endless rows of trees, casting long, twisted shadows in the dim light. My mind screamed at me to run, but I stood frozen in place. I had to know. Who's there? My voice came out shaky, almost a whisper. No answer. I waited, holding my breath, hoping for a sign, a clue, anything. But nothing. The only sound now was the wind rustling through the leaves, but even that felt like it was mocking me. I turned around and kept walking. It felt like my footsteps were the only thing keeping me connected to reality. And then there it was again. A sound, but this time it was closer. Closer than before. I could hear it clearly now, the slow, deliberate crunch of leaves beneath footsteps, almost like the person following me was trying to hide their presence. It was so close that I could feel the breath on the back of my neck. I didn't dare turn around this time. Couldn't. I knew that if I looked, I would see something that I wasn't ready to face. I needed to get out of these woods. But how? Every step I took seemed to lead me deeper into the darkness, deeper into a place that no longer felt like Earth. Felt like I had wandered into something far older, far darker. Suddenly, I felt a sharp chill in the air, as if the temperature had dropped in an instant. Goosebumps prickled my skin, and my breath became visible, even though it was still summer. Something was wrong. I knew it with every fiber of my being. I started walking faster, my mind racing. But the faster I went, the faster the footsteps behind me matched my pace. The sound of crunching leaves was now a steady rhythm, like a pulse beating through the forest. It was as if whatever was following me was drawing closer, and I couldn't stop it. Then I heard it. A low growl came from behind me, right on the edge of my hearing. I didn't need to turn around to know it wasn't human. It was deep, guttural, and primal, like something that had never been meant to walk this earth. My heart skipped a beat, and I broke into a sprint, ignoring the sharp branches that scratched at my skin. I didn't care anymore. I just needed to get away. I could hear the growl growing louder, echoing through the trees. And then the ground beneath me shifted. My foot caught on something, and I stumbled, falling to the cold, hard earth. The sound of the growl was now unmistakable, as if it were right behind me, just inches away. Panic surged through me. I couldn't get up fast enough. My hands scraped across the dirt as I tried to push myself up, but my legs were weak. My body felt like it was giving out on me. That's when I heard a voice. Not a whisper this time. A voice, clear as day, coming from somewhere ahead of me. "You shouldn't have come here." I froze. The voice wasn't like anything I'd heard before. It wasn't human. It wasn't even animal. It was ancient, cold, full of something so dark that it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. Who are you?" My voice was barely audible, but I couldn't help myself. I needed answers. The voice didn't answer right away. It just lingered in the air, heavy and oppressive. Then, a figure stepped out from behind a tree. It wasn't human. It was tall, unnaturally so, with limbs that stretched too far. The skin was gray, almost lifeless, and its eyes. Those eyes were black. Empty voids that seemed to suck the light from the air around them. It took a slow step forward, its feet making no sound against the ground. The air around it seemed to warp, bending and distorting like a heat haze on a hot day. My breath caught in my throat. The figure didn't seem to have a face, but I could feel its eyes on me, boring into me, like it could see every fear, every doubt, every regret. It was as if it knew everything about me without me ever having to speak a word. And then the voice spoke again. "Now you'll stay here forever." The words sent a shock of cold terror through my chest, paralyzing me. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The only thing I could do was stare at it. The growl behind me grew louder again, and the footsteps picked up pace. The creature was coming closer, its form flickering in and out of the shadows, like it wasn't entirely bound to this world. It was something older, something that didn't belong here. I couldn't fight it. I couldn't outrun it. There was nowhere to hide. All I could do was watch as the creature closed the distance. And then it spoke once more. "You're not leaving. Not now. Not ever." Suddenly, the world around me started to shift. The forest no longer looked familiar. The trees twisted, contorted, and the ground seemed to rise and fall like it was alive. The air was thick with the smell of decay and the suffocating weight of something ancient. I had walked into the woods seeking something simple, a shortcut, but now I had found something far worse, something that would never let me leave. And the worst part? It wasn't done yet. Couldn't breathe. It felt like the air was being sucked out of my lungs, leaving me gasping for something, anything, that could make sense of what was happening. The figure before me was still, its dark presence hanging in the air like an anchor, pulling everything into a thick, suffocating silence. It didn't need to move. It didn't need to speak again. The tension was enough to drown me in terror. But the voice that had spoken to me, low, chilling, as if it had come from the very depths of the earth, still echoed in my mind. "You're not leaving. Not now. Not ever." The world around me was bending in impossible ways, distorting. The ground beneath my feet felt like it was slowly crumbling, as though it was about to open up and swallow me whole. The trees twisted in unnatural angles, their gnarled branches stretching like skeletal arms, closing in on me. I had never been so aware of how utterly trapped I was. I tried to take a step back, but my legs felt like lead, unresponsive. It was like the forest itself had gripped me, its unseen hands pressing in from all sides. My eyes were fixed on the creature, but something inside me knew that looking away wouldn't change anything. It would only get worse. The figure, tall, impossible to comprehend in its shape, took another step forward, its form shifting in and out of the darkness. It felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake from, like I was suspended in a moment that didn't belong to time. Then, there was another sound. Footsteps. But these weren't like the ones that had been following me before. These were heavier, slower, like something dragging itself across the forest floor. And it wasn't coming from behind me. It was coming from all sides. My heart began to race. Where was it coming from? What was closing in on me? The growling. That deep, primal growl I had heard before. It was growing louder, clearer, until it vibrated in my chest. I could feel the ground shake beneath my feet, and the trees, those dark, twisted trees, seemed to lean in closer, as if they were witnesses to whatever nightmare I had stumbled into. It wasn't just the creature anymore. Now the forest itself was alive, aware of me, watching me, and it wanted me gone. The sense of being watched, stalked, pursued, it was overwhelming. Every time I tried to move, every time I turned to look around, the sensation of unseen eyes was unbearable. The creature hadn't moved much, yet, but the air around me was thick with an energy that made my skin crawl. Then the voice spoke again. "You think you can leave this place? This forest owns you now. Your presence here is its price." I could feel my heart drop to my stomach. I had no idea what that meant, but it didn't matter. The words had struck at the very core of me. This wasn't just about escaping. It was about something far darker. Something that had been here long before I wandered in. I finally managed to break through the numbness that had frozen me, taking one shaky step back, then another. I needed to find a way out. The path, the one I thought would take me home, was no longer there. The woods had closed in, shifting and changing. What was once familiar was now a nightmare. Twisted branches, shadows that didn't seem to have a source. The very air felt thick with something unnatural. The growling behind me was louder now, almost deafening. Whatever had been following me was no longer trying to be stealthy. It was coming for me, and I didn't have much time. I ran. I don't even know what direction I was going. I just ran, pushing through the underbrush, my feet tangled in the roots of the trees. I could hear the creature's steps behind me, each one pounding through the forest like a drumbeat. And then I heard something else, a hiss, a rasping, almost human-like breath that sent ice through my veins. I risked a glance over my shoulder, but in that split second, I saw nothing, just darkness, swirling around me, threatening to swallow me whole. And yet, I knew it was there. I could feel its presence, its eyes fixed on me. My pace faltered. I was losing it, losing the will to fight, the strength to run. This wasn't like any kind of pursuit I had ever known. This wasn't a chase, it was something far worse. It was inevitable, and the forest wasn't just watching, it was guiding it. A high-pitched shriek sliced through the air, so sudden and sharp that I froze in my tracks. My skin prickled, and I stumbled back, panic gripping my chest. The sound wasn't human. It wasn't even animal. It was a sound I couldn't even begin to describe. A sound of pure terror, born from something ancient, something primal. And then, from the corner of my eye, I saw it. The creature that had been following me, its form emerging from the shadows, its shape not fully defined. Its face, or what passed for a face, was blank, a void where eyes should be, but I could feel its gaze drilling into me. "Run," it whispered, but there was no escaping. Suddenly, everything around me seemed to distort again. The ground split open in front of me, jagged cracks crawling across the earth. The trees groaned and creaked, their limbs moving like they were alive. And in the distance, the growling grew louder until it was almost deafening. The forest was closing in, trapping me in its nightmare. The darkness began to rise, thick, suffocating. It crept in from all sides, swallowing everything whole. I was choking, gasping for air, but it was as though the forest itself was taking it from me. I wasn't running anymore. I was crawling, desperate to get anywhere but here. But the forest had become a maze, a living nightmare, and the more I tried to escape, the more it twisted, the more it consumed me. I could feel the darkness on the edges of my mind, creeping into my thoughts, warping my sense of reality. The creature's voice echoed in my ears, its whispers turning into laughter. Laughter that sounded too old, too cruel, too real. "You should have stayed out," it said. "Now you're mine." Then it all went black. I woke up in a cold sweat. For a moment, I thought the nightmare had swallowed me whole. But no, the nightmare wasn't just a dream. It had followed me, wrapped itself around my every thought. My breath was shallow, every part of me still gripped by the terror of the forest that had consumed me, mind and body. I was back in my room, but everything felt wrong. The air was thick, heavy, like it wasn't mine anymore. The walls, the floor, the ceiling, they were all just the backdrop to something much darker, something lurking just beyond my sight. I could feel it in my bones, that sensation that I was still being watched. The same feeling I had back in the woods. And then it hit me. The sound, the growl, it was back. A faint rumbling, low but distinct, as if the earth itself was warning me. I tried to ignore it, tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination, the remnants of the terror I had experienced. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake it. The sound grew louder, closer. The creature wasn't done with me. It had followed me home, and it wasn't going to let me go. I stood up, panic rising in my chest. The room around me seemed to distort, the walls stretching, the shadows growing deeper. I wasn't alone. I could feel it now. There was something in the room with me, something watching, something waiting. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end. I glanced around, but there was nothing there. No monster, no figure, just shadows and silence. But I knew it was coming. It always was. And in that silence, the growl started again, louder this time, as though it was coming from beneath the floor, or maybe from behind the walls. I ran to the door, but it wouldn't open. The doorknob wouldn't turn. I pounded against the door, my fists growing sore, but nothing moved. I was trapped. I could hear it now, scratching, clawing, scraping against the walls. The sound was unrelenting, like something hungry, something eager to devour. Suddenly, the room felt smaller. The shadows were closing in, creeping across the floor, up the walls. The space I had thought was my safe haven had become a prison. And it wasn't the room that was trapping me. It was the forest, the dark energy that had followed me home. I backed away from the door, my heart racing, a cold sweat trickling down my spine. I tried to think, how could I escape? How could I get out of this place before whatever was out there found me? But there was no answer, no way out. The growl stopped. Everything went still, too still. The silence was suffocating. I felt the temperature drop, like the warmth was being sucked from the room. It was happening again. The darkness was closing in. And then, through the silence, I heard it. The faintest whisper. "You can't escape." The words cut through me like a blade. The voice was everywhere, surrounding me, crawling under my skin. It wasn't just one voice. It was 1,000 voices, all speaking at once. All from the forest, from the darkness. "I've been waiting for you, waiting to bring you back. And now you belong to me." I staggered back, my knees buckling, my body shaking with fear. I was suffocating under the weight of it. the certainty that there was nowhere I could go, nowhere I could hide. The creature, the woods, the darkness, they were all part of this nightmare that had become my life. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The shadows swallowed the room, consuming everything, and the walls closed in around me. My vision blurred, everything fading to black. I wasn't in my room anymore. I was back in the woods. The air was thick with the smell of decay, the trees looming above me, their twisted branches reaching down like fingers, grasping, pulling me in. The ground beneath me was soft and wet, and I felt the mud seep into my shoes. And there it was, the figure, the one I had seen before. It wasn't just a shape anymore. It was real, fully formed, its eyes dark pits of nothingness. Its smile, or what passed for a smile, was wide, twisted, grotesque. I froze. This time I couldn't move, couldn't run. The creature had me in its grip, and there was no escaping it now. It stepped forward, its form shifting, bending unnaturally as if it wasn't bound by the rules of the world. And then it spoke again. "You were foolish to think you could leave. Now you're mine. Forever." I wanted to scream, but the words wouldn't come. My mouth was dry, my body paralyzed. The darkness was all around me, swallowing me whole, and the only thing I could do was wait. The trees closed in, their branches tangled together, cutting off any light. The ground cracked, and the world seemed to fall away beneath me. I felt the cold, dark energy wrap around me like chains. It was over. I was never going to escape. The forest had claimed me. The darkness had won. And in that final moment, I realized there was no escape. There was only the darkness, only the forest, and only the creature waiting, watching, forever. Ready for more chills and mysteries? Subscribe and turn on the bell. You never know what story is coming next.